Greetings, Southwest Louisiana. Welcome back to another episode of From Change to Change. And of course, the weather is bad, but to assure we get this out to you guys, Zoom is our safety method. So today on our show, we'll have Jennifer Landry with Flick, and she's also a vote member. We'll have Melanie Champagne. She's a local educator and vote member. Then we'll have Angela Eagley, Vice President of Village 337, as well as Reverend Devon Trey Norman, President of Village 337.
About this episode, guys. I have to say, because I know it's an episode focused on youth, and I'm an educator myself, and so I'm super excited. We got four really great interviews coming up.
Y'all just sit back and enjoy because it's going to be a lot of information coming your way.
All right, and welcome to From Chains to Change. And we are joined here today by Miss Jennifer Landry, who is a local community organizer here in Lafayette, member of multiple different organizations, and works with youth on a regular basis. Jennifer, if you would, real quick, just if you would introduce yourself, tell the folks sort of what organizations are you involved in, and how and why is it that you are so involved with youth and criminal justice reform, specifically about youth?
Sure. My name is Jennifer Landry, like Mr. Matt just said. I am one of the chapter organizers here in Lafayette for Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children, as well as another organization, Residents Organized for Housing Louisiana. And on top of that, we also have our own nonprofit organization, Speaking to Inspire Through Experience, which also has Bridging the Gap. We have a mentorship program underneath that umbrella called Bridging the Gap. So what inspired me is the love of children, for one. The love of children. I love children. I see some of the negativity that is surrounding the youth and a lot of these new laws that are being passed to criminalize them. I mean, at the end of the day, they are children. They're children, and just like I'm a mother. I'm a mother first, and I tell all of the kids that I work with, I'm a mama, and my job is to make sure that you are taken care of and you're treated fairly. So that's why, just being a mom.
I know that personal experience is really important to you and drives some of your work. So how long have you been working with youth criminal justice reform? And thinking about that, what are some of the biggest needs that you see in the youth space?
I've been working with it it's been 3 years. So it's going on 3 years. And some of the needs, honestly, is mentorship. Mentorship is so important. That positive role model in these children's lives is important. And that's a driving force to get them to go in the right direction. And that's one of the reasons why we started our program. Because I mean, I feel if we as adults step in and kind of guide the children and let these children know, hey, the things you're doing, 9 times out of 10, I did it before, but this is what I did differently. And this is why I am where I am today. So that's important.
That is very important. So you mentioned a couple of your organizations at the start. I want to talk to you about Flick first, because Flick is a sort of partner sister organization to Vote. A lot of the members cross over. Here in Lafayette, we see each other at meetings all the time. What is Flick? You mentioned what the acronym stands for. What does Flick do? And then where is Flick? I know you're in Lafayette, I'm in Lafayette, but Flick is larger than just Lafayette.
Yes, definitely. So Flick is an organization that does advocacy work for incarcerated children as well as children that are at risk for the school to prison pipeline. So if you're getting expelled and you're getting suspended in school, our job is to come in and teach and guide, the parents or the guardian on how things should be done, especially if you have an IEP. We want to make sure that when these children are at school and the school is trying to push them out, that they are following all guidelines to the T when it comes to these children. And same thing as them being incarcerated. We make sure that their needs are being met while they are incarcerated. Proper education, mental health. Those are the things that we come in as a group to, combat. We take action and we are very, very passionate about that part. Flick has been around since 2003. And there are chapters in New Orleans. That is the home, New Orleans. We recently opened up a new chapter, well, reopened up a chapter in Shreveport. There's also a chapter in Lake Charles and again, Lafayette.
Okay. Yeah, I know that one of the great things about Flick is it's multifaceted. There is direct advocacy, there's direct support that Flick provides to families, to students. And you mentioned both students who are, or I say students, youth who are incarcerated, but then also students who are in schools trying to disrupt that school to prison pipeline that you mentioned. But then also Flick does not just those direct services, they do the advocacy part. The first time that I met the director of Flick, Gina Womack, was at the Capitol testifying about a bill. They were working to revise the code of conduct for students and get some more restorative practices into the Louisiana code and laws. And so I think it's one of the great things about Flick and along with Vote is that they do multiple things in their advocacy. Some of it is the direct action, some of it is direct support, and then it's the advocacy part. And then there's also the education part. I know you and Chad have been educating everybody in Lafayette and trying to get the word out for everybody about Flick and about the youth and about working with schools and working with mentorship all over. So definitely excited to get to share that message. You mentioned mentorship as one of the biggest needs. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about mentorship and how that led you to create your own organization, because you started on this with Flick and working with Flick, which is a great, tremendous organization that does work statewide, not just in Lafayette. But that work sort of propelled you to create your own organization. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and how did that come to be? Because, right, like you said, you've only been doing this for 3 years and you have sort of been nonstop, and not many people create their own organization in 3 years based on the advocacy work they do.
Yes, definitely. So Flick first of all, they don't do direct action. They do the advocacy part. And by us working in the community, we saw there were a lot of youth here that were being locked up. They were being incarcerated, especially in school. Even in school, you have the SROs in school, and one of the biggest problems is they are referring them to the judge. They are now, once you get in trouble in school, you're being referred to the judge, and now you have a criminal record. So meeting with a lot of people in the community that work with these kids, a lot of them would always say, man, these children really need somebody to look up to. They need guidance, they need help. And also being with Flick, we come in contact with a lot of parents. And one of the things that the parents were saying a lot is they really need mentors. Can you help us to help mentor my child? My child is going down the wrong path. They need some help. So at that point, I decided, and I'll say me because when I get it in my head, I'm going for it. Chad is more of a, let's just wait. And I say, no, we have to do something. So at that point, I decided it's time to do something. So one of the first things, honestly, I wanted to do was do a communication workshop. I wanted to start a communication workshop between the parent and the youth because I saw that gap. There's a tremendous gap of communication. And I saw it with my children. My daughter was killed in 2016. And it was a lack of communication that we had. And I didn't know some of the things that was happening in her life till she was already gone. She didn't feel comfortable coming to tell me some of the things she was going through. So I didn't want other parents to experience that same hurt. I wanted parents to be able to have a conversation with the children and vice versa. So that was my main focus, that communication. But then I started saying, okay, well, now we need to help them a little bit more. So let's help them to better themselves. We want to see them on a great path. So I said, well, let's do some conflict resolution. Conflict resolution, that's going to help. Career exploration, we do team building, community activities, civic engagement, and we also teach them about drug and mental health awareness. So that was my motivation right there, just to help the kids.
That's such a well-rounded sort of approach and sort of holistic. I think we use the term often like a wraparound services and wraparound approach to talk about that holistic approach to addressing things, right? And that mental health aspect is so important, but so often overlooked and maybe under-resourced, especially in our communities. There's so many resources going into other things. And I think we've saw in this special crime session, in this legislative session, we're always willing to put money into incarceration, but very rarely putting money into those preventative measures. And that's so important when it comes to youth, especially. And I say this as an educator, right? Somebody who works with youth and works in education and does work in the school to prison pipeline. The prevention is so much more important than anything that comes after. And so great work by you and your husband, Chad. Want to wrap up real quick and ask you, if people want to contact you, how should people contact you?
So you can reach me at 337-419-9019 or Chad at 337-419, I'm sorry, 337-304-6860.
Okay.
We also have chapter meetings once a month, and we have a special one coming up on the 31st, and it's just for moms, so it's all women. This is going to be one for women, and we will be honoring mothers.
Wonderful, wonderful. I know you said at the very top, that's one of the reasons that you got into this work is your experience as a mother. So make sure to join Flick for their meeting and check out them and build those connections. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we're run out of time today, but I'm sure we will see you again.
Yes, thank you for having me.
All right, thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
All right, and welcome back to our next interview on From Chains to Change. We are joined by Melanie Champagne, and she is an educator, but she is also a vote member. And she is going to join us today to talk a little bit about her story of self, a little bit about youth and criminal justice reform. Welcome, Melanie. First,
Hey,
if
Matt.
you could introduce yourself to everybody, tell them a little bit about you and what brought you to vote.
Absolutely. So I've been a teacher for 15 years. I've taught physical, like in brick and mortar schools, as well as virtual. So as a young teacher, my first year of teaching, I was teaching at a school that had a lot of children with some adverse childhood experiences. At the beginning, I thought that I was prepared for that, but I wasn't. And so it was through learning how to both teach and teach students that have a lot of their needs not being met. Those were two things that I learned to juggle. And so I came to vote because it was through learning that some of my students had incarcerated parents. It was through learning about the impact that it had on their lives and seeing that full scale play out was more than what a classroom teacher can handle. And I started noticing a lot of the safety nets that could be provided to give them the best chance of a thriving life was insufficient. And I thought, well, I think that I want to be the best teacher I can, and that extends even outside of the classroom. So I joined Vote to figure out what it is that I can do that can contribute to my students' life, both academically, but also prepare them and hopefully advocate for their rights and their parents' rights to return home and to have those connections and build those needs so that way they can come to school fed, loved, sheltered. And so that's why I came to Vote, because to me it felt like that is something that I wanted to do for them. That's something that was needed.
That is a fantastic story. And you mentioned a couple of things there I want to follow up on. One, you mentioned really the connection that you saw between being an educator in schools and our criminal justice system, which a lot of times people don't think that those two things go together, right? That they're not connected. They think of them as far apart as possible. You mentioned the sort of social safety nets, and then you mentioned adverse childhood experiences. I was wondering if you could follow up a little bit on both adverse childhood experiences, which some of our viewers may know as ACEs. It's been sort of, there's been more in the news about ACEs and adverse childhood experiences recently, but then also some of those safety nets, and especially with youth. What are some of the consequences? And so, or what are some of the scenarios that play out? What are some of the things that you've seen around adverse childhood experiences and safety nets, both there being safety nets or the lack thereof of safety nets?
I love this question, Matt, because students don't come into the class saying, I have a lot of needs that aren't being met. I have parents that are incarcerated. These are things that they don't share. But when you peel back the curtain to their behaviors or their absences, that's when I started finding out that they're living with a grandparent, or they're flip-flopping from loved one to loved ones, families taking them in, feeling that that may not be the best situation. So I saw them going back and forth to different family members, and that was one of the first things that I noticed, is that there's not a stability in the house. And so when I started learning more about the impact of incarceration, which we know incarcerated parents is one of the 10 bullet points on the ACEs, that already is giving them an unfair situation. So they're coming into school with not having their buffers. So we know that a lot of their parents may have had some addictions. They may have had some their own adverse childhood experiences. And watching that play out in both their mental health, their physical health, I knew that this was something that I needed to learn a little bit more. And I watched a documentary, The 13th, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And though I thought I had a good grasp of what was happening in our incarcerated, in our system, in our criminal justice system, I didn't know. And it was a point of no return. When I realized the reality of what happens when we have children who are not starting off on an even platform, they're coming up with situations where they're being raised by stressed family members who are not able to deal with those buffers. So we're seeing families with depression, with addiction, and all of those things were just binding them where they could not thrive. And I thought, this is it. Like, this is something we've got to help our students find, and their parents find, mental health solutions. And that just saw that was so insufficient to truly make a difference in their lives. And I felt like I was spinning my wheels, because I want to teach them Romeo and Juliet. I want to teach them, thesis statements and research papers. But the bottom line is that they could not, their learning was impacted by how we, in many ways, society failed them and their parents. And I thought, if we truly want a better world, if we really want a world where we have less crime, then we would take mental health seriously, and we would take taking care of students' needs from early childhood education on up seriously, because what we're doing isn't working. But we do have a formula. We know that children who are taken care of, who have their needs met at a younger age, are going to grow up with a better situation, less likely to be incarcerated themselves, less likely to have poor economic situations. So I thought, this is it. I want to be part of the solution that deals with preventative, that catches them when they're younger, so that way they have a stronger platform to grow up and thrive.
I love that. And so, as a former classroom teacher myself, that resonates with me so much. We just had Jennifer Landry on talking about schools and her work with youth. And schools, right, surprisingly, for those of us who work in schools, it's not surprising, but for a lot of people, schools are a surprising connection to the criminal justice system. I wonder for you on a personal level, because unfortunately, that safety net, schools often are the only thing provided. But that puts a lot of stress on teachers, right? That you have to do so many things and wear so many hats. What is it like for educators, or for even your own experience, to have to be such a large part of that safety net? Because you talked a lot about prevention, and right, if schools are the only prevention, then it's not a very wide net, right? We need a lot of different sort of preventative measures. What's it like for teachers in this situation of being sort of like expected to work miracles?
It feels like being given a puzzle with very many of those puzzle pieces missing. So, for a teacher, at the very beginning, I think I was resentful because it was completely overwhelming. Um, College doesn't prepare you to deal with children who are underfed, who are abused. Um, there is just no handbook for that. And I think as I got older and as I started learning about what is the reality of these students' lives, like we can say, oh, personal responsibility. Your parents should have not done whatever it is. But have we really grasped with the idea that they themselves, their parents, had issues growing up that were not met? And so as a teacher, I feel like it's a big secret. We're supposed to figure it out, right? We're supposed to go the extra mile. We're supposed to listen to them. And all of those things are important. But there is such an insufficient amount of support for that. So teachers are incredibly important as the front line to helping students thrive. But it's not just us. It's the grocery worker for the community in which they shop. It's their doctors. Our local judges. It's the whole entire community that is responsible for helping the situation. And I just feel like everyone is pretending that that classroom teacher has all the tools at at her disposal, and we simply don't. And it really does feel overwhelming. So it changes how you see the system. It changes how you deal with more grace with students. But then you still have a lot of that pressure for performance, state testing, and things like that that don't take into account the amount of things, the amount of stress that students are coming to school with, not having school supplies, being ashamed of not having what they need, hiding it. It's a lot. And I really do feel like it's unsustainable, especially with the pressure that our schools are under with the lack of funding. If I could wave a wand, Matt, I would have a social worker at every single school. Counselors, that's not the same thing, right? Because we know counselors deal with like state testing and things like that, but actual mental health professionals, if you are telling me, if you're a state legislator or somebody in charge and with power, and you're telling me that you care about public education or children, I want to see the mental health response. I want to see you taking care of the teachers so that they can be not stressed, so that way they can be the buffer to our students.
Mhm. Yeah, I think as being an educator, a lot of people recognize the important roles teachers have. And even in school spaces, they are trusted resources by students very often in that sense. So we have a few more minutes left. I am curious, you said you watched 13th. It was a point of no return. And I think that's true for a lot of people. They watch that and they are astounded. There's usually a point that people, right, their consciousness clicks on and they just can't, they don't look at things the same way. What continues to give you hope in your work as an educator, in your work about criminal justice reform, in your work with youth? What gives you hope in all of this?
That's such a great question. Meeting people who have been impacted. Meeting those who have been impacted by our criminal justice system and seeing the ways that people have triumphed through incredible obstacles, that gives me hope. Seeing that there is redemption on the table and seeing that if I can help perpetuate that, then I know that my son and my students are going to grow up and do something beautiful in this world. So my students give me hope because when they do come to you and you do wipe those tears and you do send them a birthday present or you do find their hobbies and connect to that, they respond. They're hesitant sometimes. And I think a lot of teachers are ill-equipped to deal with that. So if you are not already just personally involved, if you are just teaching and my goodness, that's enough on its own, raising a family, there is not a whole lot of investment on trauma-informed responses. We'll maybe do a professional development, but that's not going to meet them where they are. So the hope is my students seeing people who have been impacted doing beautiful things. That gives me hope, and that sustains me to know that there is something that we can do. And as long as I am part of it, I don't feel like I get too overwhelmed. It's the not being a part of it, the not knowing what to do, yet being in the midst of it is what kind of leads you to despair. And so being part of the solution gives me hope.
That's wonderful. Melanie, thank you so much. We have run out of time today, but we will see you again, I'm sure, and we'll have you back on very soon.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Sway.
All right.
Hello and welcome back. And our next guest is none other than the beautiful Miss Angela Eaglin, who is not only the Vice President of the Village 337, she is also a licensed counselor, and she is absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Angela.
Thank you for having me.
So we know that, you are a mental health professional and you deal with all sorts of people. And today we're really focusing on kids and kind of wanting to hear about your encounters, especially with incarcerated kids or kids who are just, living in some very unhealthy environments and how that affects their mental health and your experience. But first, I would love to hear your story as to how you kind of got into all of this amazing work that you guys are doing over at the Village 337, and even the fact that you're a vote member and how all of that has come together for you in all the work that you're doing.
So yeah, it goes way back. I've always been an advocate for others, my whole life, even from when I was very, very young. I was the person that got called on in my friend group and my family group for help with something to help them advocate any area in their life. So I've always been advocating for people individually. When Trayford Perrin got murdered in August 2020 is when the Village 337 came together, literally on the streets of Lafayette by blocking off of Anson Thruway. So that was the moment when I realized there were others in my community who also were against some of the things that I was against and for the causes that I were, and were ready to physically do something about it in a show of Black resistance. And we just kept it going after that and kept meeting, and we became officially the Village 337 a few months later. But that's how the Village began. Then after that, we've been kind of just hitting the ground running. We did some protests for Ronald Green after that. I believe that was September, the end of September, October 2020 at the Colonel's house. And we just simply demanded that he resign. and released the body cam footage. And he resigned. He didn't release the body cam footage. We advocated for Kawan Charles that year also, and there are so many others. Currently, I think we have 22 families we advocate for at the Village 337. And that's how we, and all of us at the Village, especially the board members and those in leadership, have been advocating, doing humanitarian work our whole lives, pretty much. So that's kind of how we all came together with that, and we love it. We enjoy doing the work. It's not paid, but our souls are being fed, that we're doing something for our community. We're not just sitting around and talking about all the negative impacts and the negative changes and the laws that are being made that are impacting marginalized communities around us and communities of colors. We're actually doing something about it. So we enjoy doing this work. And I think I met you probably about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, while doing this work, and started volunteering with Vote. And when I learned some of the initiative that Vote does and you guys' mission statement, I was like, hey, this is really similar to the Village, but a real more specific type of concentration. And I was like, I'm gonna join, because it's already something that the Village does. We just didn't have the capacity to focus on that particular area as you guys are able to. So that's my way of staying connected to that area in a more connected way, as opposed to with the Village, because we have such a large umbrella with civil rights, and political rights, that it covers. Some areas may not get as much attention as it needs. So that's my story with the Village and my Vote membership. And there was another question. It was a 3-part question. What was the third one?
I'm going to follow up on that third part here based on some of the things you said, because what struck me was you mentioning how the Village came together in that meeting other people in your community who had the same interests. And so I'm wondering, how has that intersection of community seeking justice, right, in that big umbrella, and youth, sort of in the youth in Lafayette, intersected? Like, where do you see the needs? Where do you see the work in that space?
So how it intersected was, we have people who are in their 60s connecting now with teenagers for the same causes, that maybe wouldn't have met each other before, or maybe wouldn't have crossed paths, that are learning from each other. So now we have elders in our communities who are learning from the youth, who want to get involved in the same thing that they were doing in the 60s and 70s. So that's one intersection, and we're all understanding each other and learning from each other on both sides. The work that's come from that, we've done food pantries, we've done voter registration drives, and we continue to do all of those. We've done fundraisers for the communities, we fed the homeless, we provided different things for the communities, and we connect people a lot. That's one major thing that I do with some our resources at the Village. Someone calls us, they need help for something. We may not have that specific resource available, but I connect to them to someone who could, whether it's mental health treatment that they need. Even though I'm a licensed counselor, I don't do mental health treatment when they come through us that way, because it's a conflict. But I do refer them. If they have insurance, I help them locate the insurance policies and what they need to go through for that. If they don't have insurance, I help them get insurance. We keep track of them. As long as they stay in touch with us, we stay in touch with them. And the same thing with the families that we advocate for. We connect them to the resources that they may need. A lot of families we advocate for, they may come to us because of a civil rights violation, and then we find that there are other needs that they may need. So we believe like in total wellness when helping people in the community. Another way that we've intersected is kind of been bridging the gap, or trying to bridge the gap between what the young people in our community feel about law enforcement and politicians, right? So we've gone to city council meetings. We're going in meetings with the mayor and with city council members to try to say, hey, look, this is going on. And we pay you guys the salary. So you need to listen, or we're going to get you voted out. This is, it's a demand. It's not an ask. So we're really big on those types of civil rights and just informing people and educating them. And a lot of our community, they don't know. They don't know what their rights are. They're not sure how things go. So our big thing is educating and empowering our community. And that's been a really, really big thing that we're very proud of.
The Village 337, you guys have been really doing some amazing work. I mean, I just been watching y'all pretty much from the very beginning. And just watching you guys really develop into an organization that's really a force. Like people are starting to know who the Village 337 is because of the work that you do and the people that you represent in the community. Um, what is probably one of you guys' greatest obstacle that you face in the work that you're doing? What
I
is
guess
one of the greatest challenges?
there's so many, but I guess one on the higher up list, for people
Yeah.
that don't know who the Village 337 is and what they're about, I think the greatest challenge is them understanding that we are not domestic terrorists. Our former mayor, Josh Guillory, had referred to us after Trayford Perrin was murdered as domestic terrorists, and he said he would not negotiate with terrorists. That was such an egregious statement for somebody of that title to make, and it was inaccurate. It was inaccurate, and he didn't take the time to get to know us. Eventually, he did meet with our president, Devon Norman, and those conversations were not very productive. They didn't have an impact in our community. Um, we don't feel like anything structural was done to address the needs of the community in that way. But that has been the biggest impact. People will presume that we come to destroy and divide or riot, or start fires or that sort of thing. And it's all about civil activity. And some people think shouting out things to the politicians that we voted in, or disrupting their meetings when they're holding their meetings or outside of their office is breaking the law when it's not. It's well within your First Amendment right. And it's just civil disobedience, and people just don't understand that. And what they don't understand as a part of that challenge as well is twofold: is that when we're out there participating in civil disobedience, there's always a follow-up, right? It's never just for the big hoorah and the camera stars or somebody trying to get arrested to get a mugshot for this. There's always a follow-up to it that a lot of people don't see, whether that's the meeting with the sheriff's department, whether that's a meeting with the mayor, whether it's a meeting with the governor, whereas the meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus, like Devon and I went to 2 years ago. There's always a follow-up behind civil disobedience when the Village 337 does it. So we're just not out here creating, ruckus for no reason. We do it, one, to get people's attention, and two, so they can hear our demands. And that's how it goes.
It's wonderful. So one of the questions we love to ask after asking challenges, because with justice work, there's challenges, there's successes. But what continues to give you hope in your work?
The hope that I get is persistent by the millimeters that we have of success. I follow by that. All of my mentors have always told us clinically to measure progress in millimeters, so you don't get weary, so you don't get tired. And that's what I do in civil rights. We measure progress in millimeters. We accept the losses, but any progress is always accepted as a positive. And that keeps us going, to keep the hope, because it change doesn't happen overnight. It's a total construct that we're trying to deconstruct. So it's not going to happen overnight. And we're aware of that. But we to keep on keeping on, we measured in millimeters, is my saying.
I like that. I gotta remember that.
Yes, it's important.
Yes, it is. So before we go, we want people to be able to reach out to the Village 337. So if you could provide some contact information so people could get in contact with you and learn how they can become a member of Village 337.
Yes, so our phone number, our office line is 337-247-7386. And that's 337-247-7386. You can call or text that line anytime, day or night. And our email is thevillagelafayette@gmail.com. And you can email that address at any time. And we're also on Instagram under New Civil Rights. And we're on Facebook under New Civil Rights as well. So somebody will always get back to you if you send a DM on social media also.
All right. Thank you so, so very much, Ange, for joining us today and sharing this information about the Village 337 and the work you guys are doing. We appreciate you. If nobody else told you, we do appreciate all the work that you're doing. And we hope to see you again real
Yes.
soon.
Well,
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
thank you.
All right, welcome back. We are here with another guest on From Chains to Change, Devon Norman. Welcome. If you would just give folks at home a brief introduction of who you are, who you represent, and what you do.
Yes, so my name is Reverend Devon Norman, Devon Trey Norman, and that is the first time that I've said that on a platform like this since that happened on Saturday. I'm now a licensed minister with the Imani Temple African American Catholic congregation, and I'm also the president and director of the Village 337, which is a local civil rights nonprofit here in Lafayette. So, of course, I've been in ministry and just community service and community work for the last 10 to 15 years of my life. I've been serving this community and in the Baton Rouge area and all throughout the state of Louisiana.
Wonderful. And I think, for a lot of folks, depending on who's watching at home, they're either intimately familiar with how ministry and justice go hand in hand, or this is a great opportunity for them to learn how ministry and justice go hand in hand.
Yes.
We wanted to talk to you today about the current events and the court case and sort of the justice involved youth in New Iberia. So I'm in Lafayette, and I've been following this case about a young girl who has been held, essentially held, not incarcerated because she wasn't for a long time found guilty of anything, but held in the detention centers. And there's just a lot of unknown, and there seems to be a lot of issues with this about a young girl who has been taken away from her family and not provided resources, and being held in what people can imagine are very isolating and harsh conditions. Can you tell us a little bit about this case and what has been happening for those folks who don't know and aren't familiar with what's going on, and sort of give us an update about sort of where things stand?
Yes, so of course, as you stated, we have an 11-year-old child who has been incarcerated for over 150, 60 days, I believe now at this point, prior to the actual sentencing in which she pled guilty to obstruction of justice as a part of a plea deal where she will testify against her brother who has been charged, her 15-year-old brother who has been charged with second-degree murder, I believe, as it relates to this case. Initially, we know that there were some reports that that there was some discrepancies on who shot the murder weapon that unfortunately ended the life of a young man named Cameron out of New Iberia, Louisiana. And we are so, of course, careful to give our condolences and to share our grief with the family of Cameron. But at the same time, too, we know that Iberia Parish particularly has a history of discrepancies as it relates to investigations, especially the Iberia Sheriff's Office, the way that these court systems, in particular the 16th judicial system, handles people of color and specifically children of color as it relates to these types of crimes. We, of course, when we found out that she had been arrested, started as an organization, connecting with other organizations such as you guys, to partner with us to, of course, see, first of all, before we said anything, to investigate, to see what was happening, to use our collective resources just to be that check and balance on the system that we know disproportionately affects people of color. And, anybody hearing an 11-year-old child being incarcerated for a crime that seems to have something to do with the situation surrounding her family circumstances and things she had no control over would be outrageous. But of course, we know with everything happening in the state of Louisiana that we could not just turn the blind eye to this or say, well, it was just a bad situation. We needed to investigate. And the more and more we investigated, the more we found to, with all of our collective experience, that this child potentially was a child who had some civil rights infringements and who was being used as a pawn for a greater scheme, which was to get some evidence on another case for somebody else that was going to be tried on this.
The couple things you said are astounding to me. So I'm a professor of education. I'm a former elementary school teacher, and when you say 11-year-old, the first thing that pops into my mind is that this is an elementary school child, a young child. And then the second thing is for folks to think about, right? 150 days to be held without a trial. Like, that is not being convicted and not being guilty of anything. It's almost half a year. And to think about, right, like what type of learning that child is not receiving, what types of services, that child should be in school right now, not in a jail. And I think those are, like, for me, those are two things that really jump out, that are truly astounding, that in any system, who, like, the child is not letting this happen to herself. It's everybody else. It's everybody on the outside that is allowing this to happen to this child, which is truly astounding for me to think about, as an educator, as a human, as a person involved in sort of justice causes. And it's just sort of shocking to think, right? 150 days, that's almost half a year, right? That's almost half a year. It's an elementary school child that hasn't been given the same sort of options that many adults are given.
Yeah, for worse things. I mean, I'm not an attorney, and of course, I think that's a disclaimer. As a social justice activist, particularly civil rights, we have to be very clear about. I'm not an attorney. However, we do have attorneys, and we do have people that study this work and have studied this work for a long time. I don't know of many individuals that have been even convicted on obstruction of justice charges. It just is a very hard thing to prove. And then for an 11-year-old to be put in a situation where she has to accept it as a plea deal, and then now has to go to essentially testify against her brother, where there are laws where certain individuals will be protected from having to do that because of the connection that they have in their family. And it just is funny how these types of loopholes and protections don't apply to Black people, and particularly Black children in this case. Now, are we saying that everybody should be absolved of some type of justice? Not at all. But what we are saying is that when you look at the fact that 3 people were arrested for one crime, well, they're pulling out multiple crimes out of this, and obviously multiple criminal acts could have happened. But a child that's 11 years old, that in the situation you have an adult who is the mother that has been arrested and an older brother that has been arrested, and we're still going to hold the child accountable, even up to the point in one of the rulings that the judge said was that she had to pay restitution to the family for funeral expenses for the young man that was unalived. And now, not only will she have to pay restitution, but we can also assume that the next judge is going to do the same thing for her brother, and so will the judge who will try her mother's case. They're going to probably do the same thing too. So this family is going to receive restitution 3 times for one funeral. Now, it's just little nuances like that this child, and then the judge also, my last point, he made a comment, and he told he told this 11-year-old child specifically that if it were not for her attorneys, that if it would have been up to him alone and just his own thoughts without their fight, she would be in there for 7 years, the maximum in which he could have given her. This was the tone of the judge to this child, in which he said that he was trying to help and make sure she had a brighter future.
That sounds truly awful. And I say that as an educator and somebody who knows that the juvenile system is supposed to be sort of not punitive, but restorative and rehabilitative. It's supposed to be about helping youth to ensure that they live full lives and are able to contribute to society. And this sounds like it's the exact opposite of what an effective system is supposed to be doing, especially for the situation. It seems like justice is not being placed where it should.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and you made a point earlier, especially as an educator, there are so many systems that failed this child. Not only systems, but of course, when we look at family unit, right? The adults in her life and people in her life, and not only and oftentimes we point the finger at parents and we expect them to be perfect, but they're human, right? They have struggles. They have things that keep them from being the perfect parents or being the perfect people that is expected of them. But where were the systems that are put in place in a democratic society that make sure that we still have productive citizens come out of situations where they may not have gotten the best upbringing, right? So you talk about the truancy, which was brought up in court. Well, why wasn't anything done about this before now? You know, you talk about the healthcare system, the amount of checks and balances that we have now to make sure that kids are getting the accurate healthcare that they need. You know, all of these systems knew that there was something wrong, and nobody did anything.
You really highlighted something for me there when you mentioned that the judge said if it wasn't for her lawyers, that the youth would have received a harsher sentence. And it makes me just think about what you're saying with those systems. And if you aren't doing this work, if we aren't doing this work, how many people won't have those folks in their corner who will receive those harsher sentences, who will be sort of subjected to the system, and in all the worst and all the wrong ways and all the horror stories that we hear over and over again that Louisiana is associated with for all the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm. And you know, one thing I think is important for us to highlight, our attorney asked the question, uh, why was it that this particular case, why was the courtroom open to the public for a juvenile? You know, it goes back to this idea that certain people are susceptible to certain exceptions to the rule. You know, because had this been a white person that was unalived, will we have that same access? Would our families, even though it was a juvenile, still be able to go into the court to see exactly who it was, to see them in person, to have that impact statement read in front of everybody in the public, and to have this, while the state tried to insinuate that they were protecting her future and her image by sealing certain documents, they left room for the public to still come in to know who she was, to know who had committed this crime, quote unquote, and what she was going to do as it relates to testifying against her brother. So still having her to admit to obstruction of justice, still having them to take some accountability in the public eye, so that the public could see that this type of stuff is not going to be tolerated only when the recipient doesn't look like, unfortunately, the people who are taken out.
Thank you so much, Devon, for joining us. It has been wonderful, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank y'all for having me, and thank y'all for the great work y'all are doing.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in today to From Change to Change. We truly appreciate you. And remember that Vote meets monthly every third Thursday of the month at the Downtown Convention Center located at 124 South Buchanan Street from 6 to 8 p.m. We always have delicious refreshments, so be sure to drop in. And our next episode will air on June 5th at 7 p.m. right here, Cox Cable Channel 15 and LUS Fiber Channel 3. Be sure to tune in. And our next episode, we will be talking about our upcoming conference scheduled for July 13th that will be held in Alexandria, Louisiana. Our theme is Waking the Sleeping Giant. You don't want to miss our next episode on June 5th. Be sure to tune in right here so you could get more information on how you can attend that conference. Once again, thank you.
No surrender.
No
No
retreat.
retreat.